Yeah, come on. Yeah, that's it, that's right. Put them hands up. Yeah. Hey yo, greed is good. People act how they should. Greed is good. It's where Gordon Gekko stood. Greed is good. It's all about the paper. And this is why we use the middle class labor. Hey yo, real estate was booming. Homes were on the rise. Artificial rates.
I just want to say, so today's show is going to be about how the movies of Michael Douglas in the 80s and the 90s kind of portray or become a Rosetta Stone for a lot of transitions that were going on in culture, a lot of anxieties going on among men, and just stuff in the news. But I just as proof of this, as proof of concept, when I went to pick some songs for the show, there's like 20 songs called Bunny Boiler, at least 20 different songs called Bunny Boiler. There are a number of songs called Michael Douglas. There's a band called Gordon Gekko, as well as songs about Gordon Gekko. I could go on. There's songs called Sharon Stone that are pretty clearly inspired. And a lot of those songs, by the way, are either in Spanish, Portuguese, or Italian, because Michael Douglas and all these films we're talking about today also kind of made it across the ocean and apparently spoke very eloquently to people in some of those countries. But we got to get to the guest here. The reason for all of this, the person to whom we are indebted for this fascinating topic, is Jessa Crispin. Jessa Crispin's new book. First of all, Jessa Crispin, who created Book Slut, she's the author of 5 books. But her newest book is What is Wrong with Men? And it's not. There's no question mark. What is wrong with men? Patriarchy, the crisis of masculinity, and how, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. And I do want to say they kind of do. They kind of do. Jessa Crispin, welcome to our show. I'm
so happy to be here.
And I hope you will continue to be happy to be here. I find the topic really, really, really fascinating. But, you know, it's also what you've done in this book isn't easy to put into a thimble of summary. But it seems to me that one of the things that you're reflecting on is the 80s and 90s are kind of a time of transition. A lot of things are changing in just economics and the business environment, and certainly in the relationships between men and women, and economic opportunity and our attitude vis-a-vis other countries. And Michael Douglas is just sort of there. He's like the Zelig of the 80s and 90s. But say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, he became our vessel for male anxiety, I think. But yeah, I was trying to think about a better way to talk about the crisis in masculinity, because obviously that's been a hot topic for several years now. And the way people talk about it, it always turns it into a personal problem. Like, oh, this guy has toxic masculinity. And it's just like, I don't know if this is a personal problem, if this is like a demographic issue. So I was asked to write an essay about Basic Instinct for the director's cut was being re-released. And as I was watching it, I thought it was just a sort of fascinating document for its time and also for our time about the hostility and animosity between the genders at this time where the power balance is being renegotiated between them. So I thought I'd see what else he'd been up to. And it just turns out that, like, one after another, it seemed to sort of document or open up something about a larger issue that I feel like we've been oversimplifying.
So let's begin. This, I think, just doing cases in point is fascinating. Just what you've done with all this. So let's begin. Oh, I should say that in the second segment, we're going to talk about Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct, which I think is where most people's thoughts go when you bring this up. But really, the character he played, whose name even has persisted, as we demonstrated at the beginning of the show. I mean, you probably don't know that the character in Basic Instinct is named Nick, which is also the character he played in Black Rain, I think. But you do know Gordon Gekko. We're going to talk a little bit about Wall Street here. Let's hear. This is A1. His famous speech.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed, in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
This is a movie directed by Oliver Stone. I don't know, we could begin wherever you want to begin, Jessa, but I mean, one of the real questions about the movie and then about the audience's engagement with the movie was whether they understood that Gordon Gekko was a negative example as opposed to a positive one.
Right. Well, this is the problem with a lot of the anti-hero movies of the time, whether it's this or Goodfellas or Fight Club even. People watched Fight Club and then they decided, oh, I'm going to go start a Fight Club. that looks kind of cool. So I do think that there's a problem with using film as a method of social critique and to get the audience to understand that. But all at the same time, like, it's completely understandable because he looks really good and he's having a very good time in the course of the film. And he's also maybe the only character who is having a really good time. So of course, people are going to look at him as aspirational. But yeah, Michael Douglas mentioned in interviews that he was surprised how many times since that movie came out that he's been approached on the street by a young man saying, this is the movie that convinced me to go into finance. And of course, all of those Gordon Gekko Juniors went on to crash the entire world economy. So in a way, Gordon Gekko looks like a more stable and reasonable figure compared to the generation that followed him.
Well, I think also in a period of unhappiness, and it could be argued we've been in a permanent period of unhappiness for about 45 years. But disruptors are often very attractive to people. I did a piece for Salon near the end of the run, or maybe at the end of the run of Breaking Bad, and I just kind of took it for granted, right, in the piece that everybody understood that Walter White had become a monster. He was like a horrible person. And I was just ripped apart in the comments section. I mean, in Salon, everybody just gets mad at you in the comments section. But people were going, no, he was sticking it to the man. And I do think that there's a little of that quality with Gordon Gekko. He is upsetting an established order. And in fact, Jessa, there's another small role in the movie played by Hal Holbrook, who's this kind of older, very kind of classically Republican guy who works in the same office as Charlie Sheen does, and he's the Mr. like buy a good company and hold on to it. We're not in the business of stripping for parts. And he comes across as rather quaint. I mean, he's kind of not what everybody wants to be.
Right. I mean, it's not only that he is seen as sort of cringe, it's that his way of doing business would no longer make you financially solvent, right? The way that banking regulations changed in the 80s ensured that traditional finance was over, that the only way to make a profit at that point is going to be through speculation, and it's going to be through deregulation and taking enormous risks. And so as a result, in the movie, the young Charlie Sheen character is trying to figure out which path he's going to follow. Is he going to follow this traditional, more respectable version? Is he going to follow, Gordon Gekko and his sort of illegal activity that looks like a lot of fun? Or maybe, his union man father who works for the airlines. But honestly, like in that moment, 1987, when the film came out, by then the regulations had already put in place that guaranteed that those other options aren't real options, because you can't make a stable existence out of blue-collar labor anymore. And you can't make a profit from traditional finance. And so the only path forward is Gordon Gekko.
And, with that in mind, too, there turns out to be sort of a Gekko-verse, not even counting the Geico mascot. Obviously, there was a 2010 kind of reboot of Wall Street. But even before that, as you point out, in the movie Boiler Room, the characters there are very aware, kind of in the way that the characters in The Sopranos are very aware of Martin Scorsese movies. They're very aware of all this. Let's play A2 here.
Well, life all comes down to a few moments.
This is one of them. Sheen was kind of a pimp.
No, shut up, man. Listen, Gekko's coming up. What's going on? I'm looking at 200,000 shares move, pal. I want to know if we're part of it. We better be, or I'm going to come down and eat your lunch for you. Back in two, Alex.
I love that it's 40, 50. It's an insult. They're analysts. They don't know preferred stock from livestock. So can wait till it goes down and I come up and sperm count.
This is a kid. Calls me 59 days in a row, wants to be a player. Ought to be a picture of you in the dictionary under persistent, kid. Yeah. Now listen, Cherry, I'm looking for negative control, okay? No more than 30, 35%. Just enough to block anybody else's merger plans and find out from the inside if the books are cooked. Looks as good on paper. We're in the kill zone, pal. Lock and load. Lunch? Oh, you gotta be kidding. Lunch for whips. Okay, Fidel, I'll talk to you.
Very good.
So they're kind of doing Rocky Horror Picture Show. These guys who are traders about, 12, 15 years out from the movie Wall Street they're just kind of doing it along with the movie. They know the lines, right?
Yeah, but this is also the weirdness of Hollywood. In the early days, there were gangster movies, in the 20s and 30s coming out of Hollywood that the actual mafia were watching, and they decided, oh, that's how we should be dressing. And they started dressing not Hollywood wasn't inspired by the mafia. The mafia was inspired by Hollywood. And that is what sort of created the classic understanding of what a gangster looks like. And so there is something about Hollywood that even if you're trying to make a critique, even if you're trying to pull something apart, you end up just sort of regenerating it endlessly.
Can I just make this is sort of a sidetrack, but you could write a whole second book about smoking in these movies. It's just amazing how, like in Wall Street, Martin Sheen, who plays Charlie Sheen's father, appropriately enough, he's smoking. Charlie's character is kind of worried about that, but he's also worshiping Gordon Gekko, who smokes all the time. And eventually Charlie winds up smoking, and then we get to Basic Instinct, and Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas are constantly, and movie after movie, and the smoking is in Black Rain. And of course, poor Michael Douglas now has this horrible cancer condition that probably was brought on at least partly by all the smoking he was doing in real life. But yeah, and in a weird way, that was another thing that was in play and in transition in the 80s and 90s. Gradually, workplaces. I joined a newsroom in 1976, and it was just like a weather system of tobacco smoke in the city room every day. And then, in the 80s and 90s, that was another thing that wasn't necessarily a given anymore. And I think so much of your book and these movies is about things that used to be a given, but they're not anymore.
Right. I mean, there are two Michael Douglas movies where the character says the line, "What are you going to do? Arrest me for smoking?" Right? When somebody asks him to please put the cigarette out. But also that whole anti-hero, Michael Douglas in Black Rain is such like this cliche of the midlife crisis with the smoking and the motorcycle and the stubble and the leather jacket. And, he can't take his daughter to school because he's on a motorcycle. It's a very sort of funny vision of manhood over there.
No, absolutely. And sort of rebellion is, in a lot of these movies, one of the themes, and disruption, and the smoking maybe is somehow. One thing that you looked at a little bit is also the question of Michael Douglas's father, Kirk Douglas, who was, I think, a much more standard kind of movie icon, who played sort of roles in which the either heroism or villainy were pretty stable concepts as opposed to some of the layers of the son. But say a little bit more about father and son here.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting comparison between the two, in the sense that Kirk Douglas, in this moment of post-World War II America, was playing this enormous range of roles, from war heroes to cowboys, heroes, villains. He played Van Gogh, he played Spartacus, and this sort of reflects the imagination that we had about what a man's life could and should look like. Just enormous range of possibilities, open to pretty much anything. And then his son comes of age and starts appearing in films, and his roles are very limited in a way that Kirk never had any problems with. He basically just plays variations of the professionals, right? He plays lawyers, he plays detectives, and he plays bankers, and he plays them again and again and again. And it seems like we have limited our ideas about what men's lives could and should look like. And I think, coming into the generation after Michael Douglas, now we just have superheroes and old dead geniuses. We have you could be Elvis, or you can put on tights and punch people in the face and fly around in the air. This is kind of the only things that we think that we want men to do these days.
Or Michael Douglas wound up playing Liberace, which is quite a long stroll away from where he was. But yeah, there's actually a moment in Basic Instinct where I swear to God he does a Kirk Douglas impersonation. The next time you watch Basic Instinct, there's a movie. I kind of have to back away from the mic to do it, otherwise I'll blow your headphones off. But it's kind of like at one point he goes, "What is this? Some kind of joke?" But he screams the word joke. It's very Kirk. So there's another kind of movie that was coming out in the 80s and 90s, and that was also about masculinity. But it was the war movie, frequently the Vietnam movie, The Gardens of Stone, Platoon, Charlie Sheen again, movie. And as you note, oddly enough, although Michael Douglas seemed to be just there commenting through his presence at every twist and turn of masculinity in those 2 decades, he's just not in any movie anything like that.
Yeah, he never does a Vietnam War movie in his sort of he did like a Vietnam TV movie at the very beginning of his career. But after he becomes a star and when the Vietnam film becomes very popular, he doesn't do it, which is kind of an interesting thing. And actually, it's more appropriate or realistic, I guess, because the Vietnam movies that were coming out during this time were not really about the men who actually went to go fight in Vietnam, because this was the moment when we had this divide in who was actually allowed to not have to go to war, right? If you were college educated, if you had enough money, if you had enough connections, you could get out of it. And that was an expectation. There was very little shame in using your connections to get out of it. Whereas the men who were actually couldn't get out of it and had to go to war were Black and brown soldiers more frequently, the working class and the underclasses. That's who went to go fight in Vietnam. But when you look at the movies, it's always these, well-bred white kids. And then it's only about their sort of tortured feelings about Vietnam rather than, atrocities that Americans were committing, et cetera, being abandoned by your government, et cetera, et cetera. And so figures like Michael Douglas, coming from a rich family, well-educated, well-connected in society, that's basically who didn't go to Vietnam.
Yeah, he's also maybe almost a little bit too old to pull off one of those roles. He was a young sidekick in Streets of San Francisco. But, that's more like the Matthew Modine age in Gardens of Stone. But you're totally right about the race aspect of it. I mean, it really became another kind of tokenism that you had to have Dorian Harewood have a role in Gardens of Stone. But I mean, that was sort of it. It was sort of like a movie about white guys. We have to take a quick break. We're going to come back. I know you're waiting for Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct, so we're going to give it to you, you lurid people.
Yo, me meet one girl like in the movie Basic Instinct when the girl them get vexed, she boil off the man pet rabbit. Bunny boy, like she turn out to be a bunny boy, and she gone crazy, can't control. Yeah, she turn out to be a bunny boy, and she gone crazy, can't control. Yeah, she turn out to be.
I love this song so much because it mentions Basic Instinct and it goes into Bunny Boiler, which is from Fatal Attraction. It's like they're all one movie. And maybe it is all like the 80s and 90s were just one big, long, continuous Michael Douglas movie. You can begin to think that reading the book by Jessa Crispin, our guest today, What is Wrong with Men, Patriarchy, the Crisis of Masculinity, and how, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. So let's set this up here a little bit. I mean, I think we are once again talking about the anxiety of transition. In the 1970s, mid-1970s, there starts to be not only, not just the movement of feminism, which has been around already for a while, but there's like a certain kind of book that's coming out, like Passages and the Height Report, and these are sort of inviting women to kind of examine their options and how their life doesn't have to be dictated by this pre-existing script and everything. And it kind of leads, I think, to some of the Michael Douglas movies and other related movies that we're talking about. I think it really scared men. And so, Jessa, around this time, you start to get a lot of femme fatale movies, not just the one or two that we're about to talk about. There's just a lot of these movies out there, whether it's Against All Odds or Black Widow, or I mean, I could run through a whole bunch of them. And it's all kind of vagina dentata, right? It's all women are dangerous, approach with caution. But say a little bit more about Fatal Attraction and how it fits into that.
Yeah, I think Fatal Attraction is the result of the thought experiment of what if women start to treat men the way men have treated women? And Michael Douglas in Fatal Attraction is put in a very familiar place for a lot of women, women who date men, that is, in that he has an affair, a relationship. It doesn't go very well. He tries to put an end to it. And he finds himself being followed. He finds himself being threatened. He finds himself being attacked. And now his family is at risk as well. And that's a very common experience for a lot of women who've dated men, in that they get stalked, they get harassed, and sometimes they are murdered by their male partners. And it's kind of a funny repeating pattern in Michael Douglas movies where he finds himself in the role of the woman. And instead of giving him some sort of insight into what women have been having to deal with for all of this time, it just makes him really angry that people don't seem to understand that he's a man and he shouldn't be having to deal with this. So there is a funny scene where he asks the police, this woman is stalking me, she's threatening me, I think she set fire to my car. And the police are just like, yeah, we don't really care about that. And if Michael Douglas had any women friends, they would tell him, the police do not care if you're being stalked. Maybe if you're murdered, they'll start to care about that. But if some guy is just following you around and setting fire to your belongings, they're not really going to do that much about that.
All right, so let's hear a little clip from here. I don't know if we've said it yet or not, but Glenn Close plays Alex Forrest, who I believe is a book editor. Michael Douglas is Dan Gallagher, and here the two of them go. B1.
I just want to be a part of your life.
Oh, this is the way you do it, huh? Showing up at my appointment?
What am I supposed to do? You won't answer my calls. You changed your number. I mean, I'm not going to be ignored, Dan.
You don't get it. You don't get it.
Don't you remember our weekend? Wasn't that wonderful? Why can't we just be like that again? I know you feel it too. I mean, what are you so afraid of?
Hey, just don't flatter yourself, Alex.
Go ahead, hit me. If you can't me, why don't you just hit me?
You're so sad. You know that, Alex? Lonely and very sad.
Don't you ever pity me, you smug bastard.
I'll pity you. Because you're sick.
Why? Because I won't allow you to treat me like some slut you can just bang a couple of times and throw in the garbage? I'm going to be the mother of your child. I want a little respect.
I mean, in some ways, the moral of this movie is a modern trope that you see on the internet a lot: F around and find out. And that's what happens to our friend, Mr. Gallagher. So say a little bit more about what we're seeing here. I mean, what's weird about this movie is that in some ways, I think it doesn't survive its own intentions. I mean, if in fact Michael Douglas's character is meant to seem, as clueless and ineffectual as he does in a lot of these scenes, it's still ultimately, I mean, Bunny Boiler, there's 20 songs called Bunny Boiler. Bunny Boiler turned into a trope. And in a way, she's what emerges from this movie as being demonized as opposed to any of the mistakes that Michael Douglas's character makes.
Right. I mean, she's a terrifying figure in the sort of masculine imagination of this time, which is, what is a liberated woman going to do, right? What is a woman who cannot be controlled by her husband, by the state, by patriarchy? What are they going to do? And I think that there has always been throughout history the mistress, the courtesan, the sort of disposable woman that can be intimidated into silence about her mistreatment, right? And that worked because women were not allowed to have money. They weren't allowed to have property. They had to have relationships with men in order to have bank accounts for most of recorded history. And so that's a really easy person to intimidate. You just cut off their source of funds and you can get them to shut up. But in this moment, this movie came out in 1987, the same year as Wall Street. This is at the time of the Anita Hill testimony. This is right before Monica Lewinsky. And there is a sense that these women who used to be quieted down so easily through intimidation are now getting in front of the media, getting in front of the courts, getting in front of the families of the men who mistreated them and saying what happened to them. And that was really sort of terrifying to men. And I don't think that they really wanted to think about it.
And, another part of this, by the way, there will be a few spoilers today. These are, 45-year-old movies. So we don't feel too bad about that, but there will be some spoilers. It's kind of weird because right around about 3 years after this movie, Presumed Innocent comes out. And in each case, the wife murders the mistress or kills the mistress. I mean, in Archer, I guess I wouldn't necessarily call that murder. But and that's kind of interesting, too. It's like the men are so ineffectual, the women take over the other side of the equation. Michael Douglas's character is really not able to handle this.
Right. No, of course, he has a couple moments where he tries to take care of Alex, whether to just intimidate her into shutting up or to actually kill her. And he kind of messes it up each time. And so, of course, all of these movies are being written and directed by men. And I think that is an important thing to note, because I think it's a particularly male imagination of the dynamic between the wife and the mistress, right? That there's this kind of fear or the assumption, I guess, that the Alex character, who is professional, she has her own apartment, she has her own money, she's very independent, is a threat somehow to the wife, Beth, who is not, we don't know really what she does. Mm-hmm. She's not really a character. I think this is part of like a man trying to write this story and being like, what do women do all day? And it's like, well, she puts on lotion and she gets dressed and she gets undressed. And that's kind of all we see her do until she gets a gun and shoots Glenn Coast. But there is this kind of this assumption that feminism is not going to only destabilize the lives of men, but also the lives of the so-called more traditional woman as well.
I do want to point out, first of all, I would love to talk more with you about this movie. We're a little pressed for time here. I think there is sort of an interesting kind of Beowulf told from the point of Grendel movie to be made here, where we actually get to see Alex's whole experience of what for her is like, this Nicholas Sparks novel that blows up on the launch pad or something. And she actually, has her. She brought her own little issues and hopes and stuff like that into this that are really not considered very well. There, I will point out that in 2004, Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones had to take legal action against a stalker, Dawnette Knight, who was accused of sending violent letters to the couple that contained graphic threats on Zeta-Jones's life. So don't think these things don't follow you around. All right, we have to get over to Basic Instinct. I just want to say, first of all, and this is me courting your approval, Jessa Crispin, that I watched Basic Instinct before I rewatched Basic Instinct prefatory to reading your book, and I spotted the green sweater. Although I have a different take on it than you do. I have a slightly different take on the green sweater, but we can't start there. We have to start with, once again, might as well set up the premise of Basic Instinct for anyone who doesn't know it.
Yeah, the premise of Basic Instinct is that there's a serial killer who is killing men, and Michael Douglas, now in the form of Nick, has to solve the crime. And instead, the woman who he is investigating, he very sort of awkwardly and inconveniently falls madly in love with her and can't decide if he wants to arrest her or marry her. It's a very, very classic conundrum.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about Nick, that character, the Michael Douglas character, is, he's a mess. And he's he's got this very, very trembly, leaky dike that's holding back the floodwaters of this horrible mess where, first of all, he's been investigated for accidentally shooting 2 tourists. His wife killed herself, although that's like a throwaway line about halfway through the movie that isn't really interrogated at all. And he's trying to do stuff like quitting smoking and quitting drinking, and that's probably not going to work very well. And so he really is an accident waiting to happen in this movie. Let's hear a little clip from it. We're going to hear George Zunza as literally Nick's only friend in the world, Detective Gus Moran. Sharon Stone is Catherine Trammell, and Michael Douglas, of course, as Detective Nick Curran.
You working on another book?
Yes, I am.
It must really be something making stuff up all the time.
Yeah, it teaches you to lie.
How's that?
You make stuff up. It has to be believable. It's called suspension of disbelief.
I like that. Suspension of disbelief.
What's your new book about?
A detective. He falls for the wrong woman.
What happens?
She kills him.
One of the things that struck me watching the movie again and then reading your book, and one of the things that you've talked about, is that women in some ways were better primed for the transitions of the 80s and 90s because they'd built their own support networks. And they did. They had books that told them about passages and things that they were going to go through. And men didn't. And this character that Douglas plays here, he's a really lonely person. I mean, his partner is literally the only friend he has in the world, as far as I can tell. And he's kind of symbolic of that problem of men too, that men didn't really make a plan for what would happen if some other institutions died down a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when I was researching the book, I spent a lot of time reading men's magazines from the 80s and 90s, like Esquire and GQ, just to get a sense of what the discourse was. And in that part of the culture, it was like feminism did not happen. There was no sense that men were going to need to adapt to things like the fact that no-fault divorce was now available, which caused a flood of divorces that were almost entirely being initiated by women, right? Like the vast majority of these divorces were because women were unsatisfied in their marriage. And I think that the refusal for men to adapt to that situation created the environment where Michael Douglas is lonely, but also we now have a couple generations of this loneliness crisis with men, and this feeling of being sort of cut off and frustrated because we don't have men don't have the same support system that women do. And through, 150 years of feminism, women have created nonprofits and they've written books and they've created their own media and they've created scholarships and all of these other ways of helping each other out. And men didn't do any of that because they expected to always be the sort of center of attention, to always have the institutions be on their side.
So there's another part of this that you really got me thinking about another aspect of Basic Instinct. And that is, I should say, in the mid-'70s, the book The Height Report came out. And even if people didn't read The Height Report, the one thing that they might have retained somehow is that women have a better opportunity to control their physical sensations and maybe experience orgasm if they're on top, if they're straddling the man. Because there's so many straddling scenes in this movie. And really what's underneath that is Catherine Trammell, the first thing she tells everybody is that she's very insistent on her own pleasure. And that's kind of how she evaluates men, is whether they give her pleasure or not. And, oddly enough, in the 80s and 90s, in the 80s, that was sort of a radical idea for men, that they had some role to play in sexual intercourse other than having a real great orgasm themselves. And it's just so interesting how that plays out over the course of the movie, because, in fact, and I'm sorry for babbling, but the Michael Douglas character has a relationship with his therapist, Jean Triplehorn, who does not have orgasms with him. And then he has this very sort of, just epic simultaneous climax with Sharon Stone, and he calls it the boop of the century, and he sort of discovered a much more satisfying form of sexuality when he was paying a little bit more attention to the sensations of the woman. But there's just a really high price to pay for that discovery. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, there's a really disturbing sex scene in Basic Instinct where he is having sex with the therapist, the woman played by Jean Triplehorn, where she keeps trying to consent to what's happening, and he keeps escalating things, making them more violent, more uncomfortable, more disturbing, until she says no, and he decides to continue anyway, right? And there is this kind of, it's disturbing to watch, but it's also disturbing to think about the way that she keeps trying to participate in her own violation, right? She keeps trying to make it okay for both of them that he's behaving this way. And I think that was a lot of relationships. I think that's a lot of relationships now, even where women are trying to adapt. They're trying to make it okay. They're trying to consent. And the men don't want relations with women. They want dominance for a lot of this. If you look at sort of men like Andrew Tate, men like Andrew Tate are terrified of being vulnerable, of being open. And so what they do is they sort of preach this mistreatment of women and say that's the only way. You have to control them. You have to dominate them. Anything else and you're somehow gay. I don't really understand how sleeping with women still leads you to be gay, but that's such a weird fear of Andrew Tate's.
Mm-hmm. So we've made the green sweater kind of a Chekhov's pistol. We're going to have to deal with it now. So at one point, Michael Douglas, his character, goes to this very kind of pansexual sex dance club, and Sharon Stone is very pansexual. Her character is very pansexual all the way through the movie, but it's hip and edgy, and so he shows up in this very crappy-looking green sweater. I didn't know we were going to have cameras on today. I wore the closest thing that I had to that sweater. But explain why you find it significant.
Yeah, well, I think it matters that this is San Francisco in the early 90s, right? This is San Francisco as a sort of gay utopia / dystopia, because this is also in the middle of the AIDS crisis. And so he's basically going into a territory, which is this dance club that was not made for him, not made by him, not having anything to do with him, basically. This is a social scene. This is a dance scene. This is a community of gay people, of women, of Black and brown people. And here he comes with the worst sweater you've ever seen in your entire life. You can tell it's made of synthetic fibers. You can tell he's wearing a cologne that he bought at the CVS on the way there. You can tell that it itches and that it smells like sweat and cigarette smoke. And he's there to get his woman. And part of what that sweater is doing is like signaling to everyone around him, I'm not gay, right? It's very important that everybody understand in that room that he is heterosexual and therefore superior to everybody else that's around him. But it's also this kind of arrogance of, I don't have to adapt to your world. I don't have to do anything in order to seduce you. I'm just going to take you. And I think it's an extremely interesting choice that Paul Verhoeven and everyone who worked on Basic Instinct made with that sweater.
Yeah. I had a completely different reaction to it, but I don't want to waste a lot of time on my. I'll just quickly say I thought it was I thought it was kind of sad. I thought
deeply.
He looked through his closet, and he thought, well, here's the sweater I wear all the time over a shirt. He does that later in the film. The sweater comes back and it's part of a shirt, sweater, jacket ensemble. And it was just like he's way out of his league. And he's like, okay, I'll put this on. Maybe that's what they wear or something. But I agree, it could be read either of those two ways. We've got to take a quick break. This show's going too fast. I have so much I want to talk to Jessa about. So here we go. We'll come back. And we are back. Time to say a thank you or two. One to Dylan Reyes, the maestro, our technical producer. Jonathan McPants is the producer of this episode and has assembled all kinds of wonderful clips. We have some from Black Rain and from Falling Down. I hope we can get to them with our wonderful guests. And our guest is Jessa Crispin. Her new book is called What is Wrong with Men? Patriarchy, the Crisis of Masculinity, and How, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. Before we get to either one of those movies, although each one of those movies I think very much embodies the point that I'm about to make, but, it could be argued. Well, I just want to point out, first of all, Jessa, in late 95 or early 96, right around the end of the film period that you've been chronicling in your book, Donald Trump raped E. Jean Carroll. And in 2016, the so-called pussy-grabbing tape failed to hurt his chances to become president. And, you could argue that some of the male anxiety in these Michael Douglas movies could be portrayed as, A, have there been changes resulting in my not being able to get away with stuff that men used to get away with? And B, is it possible that I will be held to a higher standard of behavior now? Those are two of the things that these characters are really, often struggling with. And it feels like the last 10 years have been a large part of society saying, no, you can still get away with stuff and you're not going to be held to a higher standard. And DEI is just, is going to go away. I mean, there's something very sad about where we are now in relation to the messages in those movies.
Right. I mean, we're kind of stuck in a grievance culture of sorts, where there are a lot of men who are struggling to figure out how to move forward with their lives. And they don't really understand the larger forces at play. And they have all of these sort of grifters and influencers constantly telling them that actually they're fine. It's the women who have gone crazy, right? Or it's the immigrants who are taking over. Or, the reason why you can't buy a house, the reason you can't afford to buy your first house isn't because of the fact that a couple corporations own like 85% of the housing in the United States at this point. It's because of illegal immigrants coming in here and buying up all the property somehow. It's a kind of, it gets people stuck, I think, in a sense of grievance, in a sense of entitlement, really, that they are the real victims of what's going on in society and not a participant in them.
So one of the movies we don't really have time to talk about is Black Rain, which is released at a time of real Japanophobia. There was also a movie called Rising Sun based on a Michael Crichton book. There was this kind of idea that Japan was going to overtake us. And by the way, Donald Trump, as a private citizen, participated a lot in that panic and that fear that we were giving up too much to other countries. But in terms of that idea of the immigrants being here and not being really part of us, Falling Down, a movie in which Michael Douglas plays a character called Defense, who basically goes on a kind of disgruntled postal worker type rampage. Well, let's hear a little clip from this. Dylan, this is C3. Let's hear this.
85 cents. What? 85 cents.
I don't understand.
85 cents. 85 cents.
85 cents? That doesn't give me enough money for the phone call. I'll give you 50 cents, you give me 50 cents change.
No way.
Yes, way.
Drink, 85 cents. You pay or go.
What's a phi? I don't understand a phi. There's a V in the word. It's five. They don't got V's in China.
Not Chinese. I'm Korean.
Whatever. You come to my country, you take my money, you don't even have the grace to learn how to speak my language. You're Korean. You have any idea how much money my country has given your country?
How much?
I don't know, but it's got to be a lot. You can bet on that.
So Jessa, that movie came out, I think, 32 years ago. It could have come out yesterday in a way. I mean, that conversation seems to be the subtext of a lot of public conversations we're having in 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that it's hard to keep in mind when you're watching Falling Down is that he does have an actual problem, right? His problem is that he made the defense industry his entire life, right? It's become his identity, like that it replaces his name. He goes by his license plate, which is defense. But he's been laid off. And that has nothing to do with him and his value as a worker. That has to do with geopolitics and deregulation and all of these sort of international forces. But he can't get justice for the wrongs that have been done to him. And so he has grievance. He doesn't have any place to take it. And so he decides that it's the problem of this Korean man at the convenience store or the gang member or his wife. Of course, his wife is always to blame for a lot of this stuff. And that's who he can stick a gun in their face and get some sort of sense of satisfaction from them.
We've got about a minute left. I know you dedicated this book to Michael Douglas. Do you anticipate that you will hear from him at some point? And if so, I mean, how might that conversation go?
I pray to God that I never have to talk to Michael Douglas about this book. And so I did receive word that he has a copy of the book. I was sent a picture of him holding the book. And I hope that that's the end of it because I love him too much to be normal in conversation with him. And so I just hope it doesn't happen so that Michael Douglas doesn't think I'm stupid.
Yeah, never talk to, never anybody that you really have those feelings about, you should never talk to them. And
don't talk to them.
I'm living proof you should never interview them. I made a mess of every interview I've ever done that kind of fell into that category. Although now I tremendously admire you and your work. So next time I'll be Chris Farley when I try to interview you. But Jessa Crispin, thank you so much for being with us today. The book, What is Wrong with Men? Patriarchy, The Crisis of Masculinity, and How, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything.